Vitaly Golomb, our keynote for today, who's about to join me on stage. He's an investor and global startup evangelist of HP Tech Ventures. He's a venture capitalist, a serial entrepreneur, keynote speaker, and author of Accelerated Startups, Global Corporate Venturing 2017 Rising Star, and leads global investments at HP Tech Ventures. My favorite thing when researching Vitaly ahead of this was that you started your first business at 13 years old, which
I
is...
didn't start it, but...
That's what the internet says.
Startups at 13, yeah.
Got involved in startups at 13, which is very impressive because at 13 I was trying to work out what left and right was, all that kind of difficult stuff. Vitaly was always already involved with startups. Another thing I love is that on the first page of Google image search of you, there is you wearing something that looks like a heavyweight belt. It's very impressive.
Yes, it was a prize. Gary knows about this. We did a conference in Ukraine about 4 years ago, and the trophy was a wrestling belt.
Amazing, amazing. So you didn't have to do any wrestling to win that, no?
No, the startups did, though.
Okay, more on that later perhaps, but at the moment I'm going to hand over to Vitaly, so put your hands together.
Thank you very much. All right, so you already got the spiel, you know who I am, you can find me everywhere. So I only have about 165 slides for you, a lot of text, get your reading glasses out. I'm only kidding. But I'm here to represent Silicon Valley's original startup. HP was started in 1939 with Dave and Hewlett and Packard. Right? They were Terman students at Stanford. Frederick Terman, kind of one of the two fathers of Silicon Valley. And he encouraged them to get together and start this company. First customer was Walt Disney, and the first product was an audio oscillator. The company today is a little bit different. We do about $1 billion revenue a week. The company split in two about 1.5 years ago, and today we're in the business of printing, obviously, still. #1 in consumer and commercial worldwide. PCs, #1 in the world, took over from Lenovo last quarter, thank you very much. And we just launched a 3D printing business, which I'm much more excited about than some of the legacy businesses. So, but this is not an infomercial on HP, just a little bit for you to understand our context and what we invest in. So, we find ourselves today at the cusp of the next industrial revolution, which is very interesting, right? The first industrial revolution gave us steam and water, mechanical production equipment, changed the world, right? And changed our education system the way it is today. The second industrial revolution was truncated by World War I and changed the world one more time. And we're arguably about 10 years into the next industrial revolution. So it started with the mobile era. And what you'll see is the convergence of physical and digital worlds. And what that means is that all this innovation, everything we're working on, is changing drastically. The Fortune 20 companies 10 years from now have not been started yet, right? All of this, everything we know is going to change drastically in the next decade. And the nice thing is that it's much easier to start a company today anywhere in the world. The infrastructure is in place. .com days gave us, .com crash, I can tell you there was no traffic on freeways for a few years in the San Francisco Bay Area. But what it gave us is infrastructure to start the next wave. And that's what we do, is we build wave upon wave. And I'll give you a link to the slides at the end, but what you can see here, I did a little bit of survey of where the top technical universities are, where the talent is. US has a pretty stupid immigration policy, you're welcome. So we tend to educate the world's best and brightest and then send them home. So if you look at things like HackerRank, US is not even in the top 20 in the world, right? It's Europe, it's China, it's Southeast Asia. So that's where the talent is coming from. Silicon Valley still has huge advantages in capital, in experience, sales, and marketing, in 60 or 70 years of technology entrepreneurship. And we'll get to that a little bit more. So let's talk a little bit about you guys. So how many of you here are entrepreneurs? Or wantrepreneurs? Want to be an entrepreneur? Great, okay. So this is for you. All right, so normal career in the corporate world, and by the way, most of my career up until about, let's say 2 years ago, 1.5 years ago, I was on this side. I was an entrepreneur just like you. I started 3 companies, and I still have a taste of blood in my mouth, right? So I'm enjoying my vacation on the corporate side for the last couple of years. But normal career, you know, what your parents want you to do is get good grades, get into a good college, get into a good company, get regular promotions, and then retire, play golf, and die. That's the American dream. You know, here it could be not golf, I don't know, competitive beer drinking. So that's a normal career. And then everybody, of course, sees all these, you know, on TechCrunch or what have you, these overnight successes, This company was just founded and then sold for $100 million, pounds, euros, almost the same thing these days. But it really looks a lot more like this. It's a really painful process. It's overnight successes, 10 years in the making, with many hours, with a lot of stress, with a lot of pain and suffering. So one of my favorite quotes from Ben Horowitz: as a startup founder, I slept like a baby. I woke up every 2 hours and cried. Some of you know this pain. I can tell you from my experience. It's cost me a marriage. It's a tough process to go through. So my goal is to kind of help a little bit. So, and it takes a long time. It takes a long time to start companies and to get them anywhere, right? It takes about a year to develop an idea. It takes about another year or two to see if anybody cares, right? And if you go all the way, that's 5 to 8 years of your life on average, right? So let's do a little math. If you start right out of college, you do your first startup and you'll likely fail. It'll take you a couple of years. You'll go back to graduate school. You'll be a little bit smarter, a little bit more experienced. You'll fail your next one faster, right, within a year, right? This is pretty typical. Ask anybody. So let's say the third one, finally, you're on track, you know what you're doing, you figured it out, you know how to raise money, you built the relationships, you go through 5 years, congratulations, you're in your early 30s. The next one after that will take you into your mid-30s. So at some point, I mean, you might have 1 to 5 startups in you if you start really young. I started at 13, yeah, sure, that's a little younger than usual. But I grew up in Cupertino. I went to Homestead High School, which is Steve Jobs and Wozniak. That's where they met. So thanks to my parents, I was born in Ukraine. They brought me to the center of the universe for innovation. Maybe if they moved to LA, I would have been a rock star. But c'est la vie. So this will, you have a limited amount of time. So that's an important thing, is to not fall in love with a particular company that might not be working. You really need to hustle and figure out if you're going to be successful. Just like if you were in the corporate world, you'd be optimizing for your career. In the startup world, you need to do the same thing. You need to figure out where you want to be, where you want to end up 10, 15 years from now, and then work towards that, right? Not just get stuck in ideas. So it's a very hard journey. My goal is to try to help you a little bit, to figure it out, to make it a little bit easier, to reduce the pain and suffering. I wrote a book to help in that as well. So let's improve your odds of success. We'll cover real quickly how, where, and what to work on, right? So the how. Right, so first of all, very important, is to understand what startups are and what startups are not. Startups are an experiment in search of a business model. They are much closer, especially in early days, to the scientific method than they are to a business, right, to an enterprise with systems and structures. And the process really is having this idea, and there are 3 stages to this journey, right? There's a scalable startup journey, which most of you are in. If you're an accelerator, certainly you're still in those early days. And what you're trying to do is find a business model, find a product market fit, start building a repeatable sales model, and then when you start realizing what business is it that you're in, you start hiring managers and start building structure around this thing. Then you get into my favorite part of the journey, which is the transition, which is this rapid scaling, right? This is where you go from 5, 10 people to 100 people very quickly, but you can only do that once you've figured out what business you're in, once you've hit product market fit, once you've locked in your unit economics and then really understand your business. So once you break even, become profitable, maybe you start scaling rapidly, you reach about 150 people and you get some managers with some gray hair or maybe no hair, then you become a company. You graduate and you become a company. Right? So this is the journey. You're not really a company until you get there. And then the other thing too is that companies that call themselves startups like Airbnb or Uber that have tens of thousands of employees, they're really not startups anymore. They are private enterprises, right? So Uber, was worth 70 billion. Who knows how much it's worth now? I think Arianna Huffington is going to end up being the CEO, and we'll get all the drivers to work for free. So she's well on her way. But essentially, those are private enterprises. Those companies would have been public back in the dot-com days, much, much earlier, but for many reasons, they're not yet. So if we get a little bit academic here, Clayton Christensen, Harvard Business School professor, talked about the technology lifecycle S-curve. And this is really important to understand as far as timing. Timing is really everything. If in real estate, location is everything, in the business world and in innovation, timing is everything. If we look at the S-curve, right, we go from research to maturity of any particular new technology. For a long time, we're investing time, effort, and money and expertise, and we're not getting much traction as far as commercially, right? But at a certain point, we hit an inflection, and that technology becomes ready for commercialization, and this is the innovation sweet spot. This is where investors start to put money in very aggressively. right? So you're going to notice, and you think VCs are chasing trends, and absolutely, yes, we are, because we're looking at these S-curves in each and every technology. So right now, AI is obviously hot, VR is obviously hot, because it's getting to a point where you can start building businesses out of those technologies. Now that window is very short, and at a certain point you graduate, and it's now in the realm of large companies, right? So all the companies that got started here grew rapidly with this industry and came out, become the enterprises of the future, become the Facebooks, the Googles, et cetera, right? So that's really the process, and you want to ride that wave. Now, if we change this graph a little bit, this is what really makes startups special, kind of new small business, is this concept of stage financing. You won't really find that in any kind of lifestyle business. You're not going to raise stage financing in a restaurant business or consulting or services company, because those are kind of known businesses, the margins are squeezed, you have a lot of competition. There's really no way to differentiate and kind of change that market and be 10 times or 100 times better, faster, cheaper than everybody else. So if you take a look at it, how much, as far as revenue, for a while you're going to be burning cash, you're going to be going really negative, then you're going to turn the corner, start becoming profitable, and then break even and go from there, right? So if we overlay the stages on this, basically you have a concept, you raise seed capital, you have some early validation, maybe some initial customers, you've proved that somebody wants this thing and they're willing to pay with their time or money for it, you raise Series A, you start really getting market traction, you raise Series B, scale validation, on and on and on. You raise subsequent rounds of financing, and then finally you get to predictable scale, whatever that might mean in your business, and you IPO, right? So this is the kind of textbook way of doing it, but it's really never that clean. You kind of go back and forth, you do some down rounds, what have you. Most companies get sold if they ever make it this far, et cetera. But this is really the model that you're going for. Now, if we look at Silicon Valley starting in the 60s, well, a little bit after Frederick Terman's days, you can see these different waves, these technology waves, these S-curves, and you can see the companies that were founded or became big during all of these different waves. And you can see how they stack on top of each other. If we didn't have an integrated circuit wave, right, from the 60s to the 70s, with Shockley Semiconductor and then Fairchild coming out of that, and then all the Fairchildren, Intel, Semiconductor, AMD, et cetera, we would never have microprocessors to do computing in the next wave, with HP coming into the business, IBM coming into the business, Apple coming into the business, et cetera. So it all builds on top of each other. Nanotech and clean tech haven't really produced anything yet substantial, but these are maybe false starts. We'll see. So the question of where. We're obviously not in Silicon Valley, Toto, right? So we are in London, and congratulations, London's number 3 in the world right now. And if we take a look at Startup Genome, publishes this every year. If we look at performance, funding, market reach, talent, and startup experience, obviously Silicon Valley is going to be number 1 in just about everything. For some reason, where was it? Let's see. Singapore, for some reason, is ranked number 1 in talent. I don't know. Go figure. But you can see, and this changes all the time. Moscow used to be on this list, but for various reasons, kind of economic suicide, they are no longer on this list because everybody moved to London, Tel Aviv, New York, or Silicon Valley that could. So if we take a look at even US for historic reasons has a lot of different clusters of innovation in different parts of the country. A lot of different industries are all over the place. So for those of you that are not super familiar with the US, you know Silicon Valley, but if you're, for example, in advertising or media or finance, you should probably go to New York. There's a better ecosystem for that. If you're in entertainment and content and gaming, perhaps LA, right, as far as technology goes. And there are a lot of different other industries that are around the country. So if we take a look at what an innovation cluster is, this is a very important concept. So when we host these Silicon Valley petting zoos, what we like to call is when lots of groups come over to take selfies in front of the Facebook building, Google building, and kind of feel the innovation, kiss the hollow ground. It's important. Everybody comes and says, we're going to be in the next Silicon Valley, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. It's great. It's very important to be passionate about it and want to do these things, but it's important to understand what are the different components of these innovation clusters. So if we take a look at, obviously we need entrepreneurs and obviously we need venture capitalists. But corporates are a very important component, because if you think about that early on part of the curve, corporates invest billions of dollars into research, into R&D, into building out these technologies. So HP has HP Labs, which has been around for 50 years, right? And all these other corporates are big investors, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a second. They are R&D centers. They're obviously potential acquirers, Right? So there are 3,500 seed-funded startups in Silicon Valley every year. There's probably just as many professionally seed-funded startups all over the world. About 10% of those make it to Series A. And there are maybe half a dozen to a dozen IPOs per year. So you do the math, right? Your odds are like 1 in 1,000, something like that. And more companies, probably an order of magnitude more companies get bought by large companies. Now, the other thing is we need universities that are pumping out great technologists and a limited amount of MBAs, not too many, right? You gotta keep that under control. Now, this is the secret of Silicon Valley. I'll give you a little secret. This is something unrepeatable. So Silicon Valley has about 50,000 director-level managers that have gone from 0 to hero with a startup in the last X years, right? In London, there might be 100 those type of managers. In New York, maybe about the same. Nowhere else do you have that kind of management talent, and that's really the secret. If you're building a global play, you're building a unicorn, and you're going to compete with everybody in the world, you're going to need to go from 20 to 100 to 1,000 people very quickly, and that management layer that makes it all stick together and grow really fast and make fewer mistakes only exists in that quantity in Silicon Valley for most categories in technology. So that's our secret. Now you need also professionals, you need lawyers and accountants and everybody else that surround the companies that understand venture capital. This is not a dentist business. This is something entirely different, right? And you need government support. So UK enjoys fantastic government support relative to most countries. The government really kicked off Silicon Valley. So if you know a little bit of history about Silicon Valley, the US government was the first customer of Silicon Valley. Before it was Silicon Valley, it was Microwave Valley. And it was really all signals intelligence, trying to fight this big red country on the other side of the world that you couldn't really fly over very easily. Right? So there's a very interesting history that goes all the way from World War II and Stanford trying to become the MIT of the West, getting all this government money, successfully creating Stanford Research Institute, SRI, and really all of it being born from there. For 20 years or so, the US government was a big investor in Silicon Valley as a customer, then as a backer, trying to get East Coast investors to come over, right? So venture capital is short for adventure capital because it's so risky. And they were doing 2-to-1 matching. For every dollar that was put in privately, $2 was either guaranteed or granted by the government. So that's how Silicon Valley was built. UK is doing a great job. Other countries, Israel, Singapore, etc., have learned great lessons. Other countries like my birth country, Ukraine, are struggling. And despite huge talent, zero government support, right? So all of this lives in large pools of private capital, and you really need a public stock market to shoot for these companies to get that kind of valuation and scale, right? So this is kind of the complete cluster innovation. This was put together by Jeremy Engel from UC Berkeley, teaches the venture capital program there. So the economic impact of venture capital is absolutely massive, right? So if we look at the number of VC-backed companies, in the US, right, in the public markets, 43% of all public companies in the US were venture-backed at some point. By market cap, they're almost 60% of the market cap of all the stock markets, about 40% of the employees, and most of the R&D, right? So over 80% of the R&D happens by venture-backed companies in the US. If we look at number of employees working in venture-backed companies, this is the importance of venture capital, it's growing, right, over the years. And if we look at percentage of public companies with each year, it's also kind of, it ebbs and flows as we go through different cycles, but generally it's up and to the right. And so now let's talk a little bit about corporate venture and the importance and the place of corporate venture in all of this. So corporates invested almost $25 billion across more than 1,300 deals last year, worldwide, right? Of those tracked, so it's probably even more. And if we look at quarterly global corporate venture versus VC, it's about 20%. About 20% of all corporate venture, so it's a really strong player. And you can see it's really kind of creeping up over time. You're going to see more and more and more corporate money going in. And actually a lot of the institutional venture funds, kind of the purely financial venture funds, have corporates as LPs. So if you really look at that, it's even more of the capital comes from corporates. If you look at geographically, it's actually increasing in Europe by a big margin very, very quickly. Right? So US is kind of shrinking by share worldwide. And there are about 1,000 active corporate venture programs at any one time at this point. And that's growing. And you can see that in 2016, In the UK, it was 1.12 billion USD, so I don't know, about a billion pounds in 62 deals, right? Something like that. So it's growing as well. But, right, we're talking about corporate accelerators. Should I go back? I'll give you a moment. I'll take a drink of water. It's a little commercial break. But corporate accelerators have some tough competition. So this is the ranking of the world's top accelerators, and very few of them are corporate. Because corporates have a very narrow area of interest, right? So where Y Combinator and the like will just go for the best financial results, no matter what the company is doing, and they'll chase the trends. Corporates have a predetermined path and a long-term plan, and the corporate accelerators are typically, and corporate venture programs are typically really narrowly focused to support those initiatives, right? So you kind of pick, and maybe you get lucky, and you hit a trend, and what the corporate happens to be interested in happens to be very hot right now. But in most cases, if you have an accelerator just chasing biggest possible companies, they will be a little bit wider, right? So a lot of that. So what should you be working on? Where should you invest your non-refundable lifetime, right? Where are the trends? So if we're looking at, primarily from my perspective, and there are other views, there are other industries, but I think healthcare, transportation, logistics, manufacturing, and finance are going to be areas that are going to completely transform in the next decade. So if we look at AI, right, biggest buzzword in the world at the moment, AI is starting to infiltrate absolutely everything. The prediction is by 2035 it'll be an $8.3 trillion market with a T, right? So it'll be 2 orders of magnitude bigger than absolutely anything, and it will make an effect on absolutely every category of business. If we look at augmented reality, and we'll come back to AI in a second, VR is interesting, but it's really a bridging technology. Augmented reality will change the way we do any kind of computing. It will change your phones, it will change your laptops, your TVs, all the screens will change, right? You're going to wear a pair of glasses or a contact at some point that's invisible to the outside world, and you're going to get all that information fed to you directly, right? At some point, you'll just jack in no kung fu, right? We'll get there. We'll get there in our lifetime. If you look at transportation logistics, obviously electrification is a major category. Tesla has an obscene market cap, but they are going to deflate as all the other auto manufacturers jump in the next year or two. You'll see that. Autonomous is a very important aspect, but then all of a sudden we have a changing concept of car ownership, and that affects insurance and parking and everything we know and love about cars, right? So that will change. And then, the giants are not asleep. Despite what Tesla investors might think, the giants are aggressively investing, acquiring, and partnering, especially in the last year, in this sector, right? So you're going to see their power, their distribution, their brands really, really power in the next couple of years. Now, if we look at AI for finance, this is really interesting. I'm a little bit bearish on cryptocurrencies. I think are a little bit a bit of a tulip craze, but blockchain is interesting as a transfer protocol and kind of smooth all the processes. But if we look at AI for finance, AI is taking out whole categories of finance, right? So did you know that last year 20% of New York hedge funds closed? Over 1,000 hedge funds in New York closed last year because they can't really compete with algorithmic trading, right? All this is getting automated. You don't need to pay your computer 7 figures and put up with their attitude and coke habits, right? So it's really changing, and you're going to see lots of different categories be really affected by AI. I know of a company in Canada that built an AI auditor, financial auditor, that's better than any human. It can take a ledger and flag transactions instantly, right? So all these things are transforming. If we look at healthcare, we're seeing a complete digitalization of medicine. And this is a really important area because from clinical and surgical all the way to personal, the way healthcare is done is going to change completely. And a lot of that's happening outside of the US because US, probably second to Germany, has the most stringent regulations as far as healthcare. So FDA is very difficult. So a lot of companies are building their technologies, getting the early testing done, and they're really coming into the US market, which is major, quarter of almost every market. They're coming in when they're a lot more ready now, right? And when they're saving a lot of money by avoiding US at the first stages. Now, if we look at mixed reality, we've seen this trend go up in the last 5 years, 20x increase of venture investment in mixed reality. We have a 5x or 10x increase in AI. You're going to see that number. It was 5 billion last year. It'll probably be upwards of 7 this year, right? You're going to see a complete rush of money into this category. And the question is, you really need to skate to where the puck is going to be. This was Wayne Gretzky's quote, if you're not familiar. So a journalist asked him, Wayne Gretzky, how are you so good at hockey? And he said, well, I skate to where the puck is going to be. And this was Steve Jobs' favorite quote. So the question is, we're certainly we're getting out of the mobile era. There are 2 million apps in the App Store. It really takes a lot of capital and user acquisition for you to break through. You're not just going to launch an app and have overnight success and become Instagram. You really have to work and spend a lot of money. So the question is, let's do something more complex. What's the next thing? What are the next platforms you should be looking at and working at? So at HP, we've identified a few different areas: hypermobility, Internet of all things, smart machines, and 3D transformation. Together, we call that blended reality, right? It's the blend of physical and digital realities. That's kind of where it's headed. So from the HP perspective, from kind of corporate, and again, it's a little bit narrow because it's corporate, I'll tell you a little bit about the little trends. So hypermobility today, we're really spoiled with high-speed internet in our pocket, on our wrist, etc. That would have been completely crazy to say 10 years ago, right? We wouldn't have this luxury. But hypermobility of tomorrow are going to be nanobots inside of your bloodstream, right? Killing viruses and making you superhuman, right? It might sound a little scary now, but in 10 years, it'll be passé. So if we look at Internet of all things, so IoT is another buzzword, and there are a lot of dead little consumer IoT products on the rocks of crowdfunding and all of that. But IoT, the way I see it, the way we see it, is it's really like the letter E that was attached to everything in the dot-com days. It is now a given that electronic way of buying something or doing something in communication is the most efficient way of doing it. So IoT means that every object will be data enabled, right? The chairs you're sitting on will have some kind of a sensor, and at the end of the day, you can see how many people showed up, how they felt, what was their heart rate, what was their favorite slide, all those things, right? You will have beer that will automatically order itself. I know this is an important topic in this country. This will be beer that orders itself when the package is running low. You will have much smarter homes that are much more efficient, and we're already seeing those trends. So IoT will get out of this realm of buzzword and become a standard very, very soon. If we look at smart machines, the first generation of robotics was really hydraulic muscles, and now we're getting into hydraulic brains. These are machines that can make decisions. This is really all about AI and everything related to computer vision and all the other component technologies that are coming together. So if we look at, for example, if you know the game Breakout, the classic game where you have a little slider at the bottom, you have a brick wall, and you bounce the ball to break it up. So there was an experiment, machine learning experiment. They built an algorithm. They let the algorithm play the game. They just gave it one rule: break the bricks. And at first, it wasn't really good at the game, right? But after a while, it started figuring it out. And within something like 45 minutes, the algorithm figured out how to beat the game in one hit, right? So it became better than any human player at the game. So that's all fun and games. What does it really mean? Why do we care? Well, you start applying machine learning algorithms at things like biology. There was a scientific riddle that couldn't be solved by scientists for 100 years, which is how does the tapeworm regenerate itself, right? And that certainly has some health ramifications. This algorithm solved this in just a couple of days, right? Solved this puzzle of how this happens, how the tapeworm regenerate itself, right? So we're starting to apply machine learning and different component AI as tools to solve things that we can't solve on our own. And if we look at, so the first robot to recognize and mimic human emotion was Pepper, introduced in Japan in 2015. So if we look at industrial robots, they're very much pragmatic. Their job is to do something quickly and efficiently, right, unemotionally. But if we're talking about companion robots, if you remember the movie for about 20 years ago, Bicentennial Man, where you had this 200-year-old robot that became human. I hope I'm not spoiling it for you. It's a Robin Williams movie. He actually he got human rights at some point, 200 years later. 1,000 units sold out in minutes, and Japan has a very old population. Average age is over 65, right? Very old population. And at some point, you're going to need these companion robots around the house to take care of these aging populations. And overall, the world is getting older. With healthcare, we're living a lot longer. Our generation is going to live to 100 easily. Our kids' generation, 120 plus. If Ray Kurzweil is right, maybe we'll live forever very soon. But these companion robots, you need to have an emotional connection with them, and that's very tricky. So Pepper is the first robot that was able to read and show emotions, right? So very engaging. If you've never seen it, encourage you to at least go look at some videos. Now, 3D transformation is a really exciting area, and this is an area that HP has gotten into quite deeply. If we look at pre-industrial revolution, everything was handmade and time-intensive. After the Industrial Revolution, blueprint design and organized production and manufacturing. Internet gave us computer-aided design and just-in-time production, and this is approximately where we are today, right? What's next? What's next is completely digital design, completely digital manufacturing, right? Seamless digital production, AKA 3D printing. And then at some point, we're going to democratize design and manufacturing, and you'll be able to think of something and it'll literally appear in front of you, literally, because you'll be able to connect your thoughts to 3D printing something. All right, so I'm not going to blow your mind too much. So HP last year introduced commercial 3D printers that are 10 times faster than the previous generation of commercial 3D and are 3 times cheaper. So the name of the game is not printing iPhone cases, right? But it's, I mean, how many iPhone cases do you really need, right? So these desktop 3D printers never really took off because they never jumped the chasm. There was really no need for the general population to have them. With commercial 3D printing, we're competing with traditional ways of manufacturing, so injection molding, right? So up to 1,000 units, or depends, maybe even up to 10,000 units, now it's cheaper to 3D print something than to make molds and do injection molding. And that's where it's headed. And what's really interesting is kind of what's coming next. So this concept is we have a voxel. It's a volumetric pixel, and you have these change agents that transform the properties of every voxel. And our voxel now is 21 microns, which is about 4 human hairs, right? So it's pretty fine resolution. So we can change, well, we'll soon be able to change translucency, strength, elasticity, conductivity, and the material of voxel by voxel, right? So what that means is we'll be able to soon print entire products, electromechanical products. There are companies working on 3D printing batteries. There are 3D printed circuits. We're getting there. We're getting there, right? We're getting to advanced materials. So I'm going to take a little water break and show you a quick little video. Hopefully it's not super loud. Yeah.
To you, designers and engineers, captains of industry, and leaders of thought, anyone whose ambitions have ever exceeded what was possible, this is your moment. Your rewrite history, the world is not flat moment. Every facet of how you design and manufacture is about to be reinvented, and it all starts here. With the smallest of building blocks, the mighty HP voxel. You and it are about to change the world by advancing radical prototyping, accelerating manufacturing, and taking precision and strength to unheard of heights. From today forward, the 3D printer is a factory for thought, where the things we make will make us smarter, better, more human. What a future we'll create with new materials and embedded intelligence. Together, we'll bring extraordinary to the everyday and reality to dreams light years away. Welcome to the age of digital production, on demand, a world without waste, without inventory, without warehouses. Meet the first HP Jet Fusion 3D printers, the digital furnaces of the next industrial revolution. Join us as we engineer the never-before, voxel by voxel. HP Multi-Jet Fusion. Keep reinventing.
I bet you think HP is a little sexier now, right? Yeah. So this is a pretty exciting area, and computer business will change, printing business will change, but 3D printing is going to be huge. And that's an area I'm pretty excited about. So what you'll see in the future, right, 3D transformation of the future, is you'll see entire products that are able to be printed. You'll see bioprinting, so it means you'll be able to, if you remember Back to the Future 2, they put a little pellet in the microwave and then pizza came out in a second. That's coming. It didn't happen in 2015, but maybe in 2025 or 30. You'll be able to print on-demand vitamins that you need. You'll take a quick blood test and print a pill that you'll take that will make you feel better. And then full circuits and be able to print fully electromechanical devices. So my note to you, this used to be inspirational, now it's a little ironic. So my message to you is don't work on the next dog walking app. And no offense to anybody working on that here in this room. But work on things that have a place in the future. It's going to take you a few years to get it right. And you need to find out if what you're working on is really a trend. So when I switched over to the dark side, what it gave me really is a much bigger view. And there's a lot of activity in the UK. It's very interesting. It's a dynamic ecosystem. And UK knows how to party like nobody else in the startup world. But what I keep seeing is things that are not thinking big enough. Think bigger. Think things that will change not just a local market, not just a little widget, but something that can make a global impact, right? AI is coming, augmented reality is coming, 3D printing is coming, synthetic biology is coming. Participate in that. Think to the future, where you want to work on, where you want to invest your non-refundable lifetime. So with that, I don't know if we have much more time, but most of you probably know about my book. I have a few of them with me here today. They're not available in hard copy in UK yet, but I have some here. I'm sure I'll see you, find me, and I can get you one. So you can also get the slides here. Go to golomb.net/Wayra. You can download the slides or get a link. And I don't know if we have time, but maybe a couple of questions.
I believe, well, before anything, let's give a big hand to Vitaly because he's been fantastic. There we go.